Hello, my name's Chris. What's yours? Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at the infamous final story of Season 9. Immensely dull and painful at the same time. So said the Discontinuity Guide's review. There are plenty of stories which have their bad raps precede them. This one, the Gunfighters, another, the Space Pirates, Underworld, the Twin Dilemma, and Time Lash some more. There are plenty of others, but those are the ones that immediately sprang to mind. Now, if this marathon were my very first experience of classic Doctor Who, then I'd probably be approaching the Time Monster with, well, dread. And in fact, the first time I watched it, I did so with caution. Profoundly wary of certain stories precisely because of their paltry reputations. I found that subsequent viewings were kind of like unfairly coloured by that. In the past, this has definitely happened when I've watched The Web Planet and the Space Museum, for example. And it happened initially with the Time Monster too. I found myself concurring with the consensus that it was Bobbins without really giving it a chance because of that consensus. Subsequent viewings where I gave it my full and undivided did show me that it was in fact not actually complete Bobbins. To be honest with you, it's a story that I actually like more and more each time I reach it, to the point where now, do you know what? My name is Chris, and I like the Time Monster. It's completely daft, but it seems that I'm just craving the right kind of daft at this point. While known at the time as a comic actor, Pertwee's Doctor has actually emerged as the least playful of the three incarnations so far. I may not have always got on with him, but by and large this approach has worked wonders in carving out his own unique take on the Time Lord. And naturally, as a result, his era has actually felt the least playful of Doctor Who so far. Not that I've had a problem with this per se, but when the Time Monster arrives with its tongue firmly in its cheek, whether that's like because of a mischievous flick of the pen or because of a cast who are determined to have fun with it, I'm actually so glad of the lightheartedness. Now, of course, there'll always be debate of whether or not it in fact is the right kind of daft, because for some it's the death knell of the story and comes across as ridiculous. But for me, I actually find myself liking how it makes it sort of stand apart, and I find that very endearing. I once read a comment many years ago on the Gallifrey Base forum. I can't remember who it was to attribute it to, so I'm sorry if it was you. And the comment said that it feels like a little bit like somebody has made a 1970s film version of Doctor Who for a wider audience. And I do get that feeling. It feels a little bit like a sideways glance at the Doctor Who of the time, and I find that makes it a really fun watch. As do many other things. I mean, it's a really hard story to take seriously when the Master has invented something that has decided to give the name Tom Tit. Every time someone says it, I laugh. And Pertwee's the best at it, by the way, because he delivers it in a way that it's like he's trying to crack everybody else up. And not only does the sincere and repeated delivery of Tom Tit make me chuckle, but so too does the Doctor's time sensor, which he has seemingly designed to make resemble a and bull. Either everybody knew what they were doing and its mischief is infectious to me, or nobody did and I'm just completely charmed by the innocence of the whole thing. Whatever the reason, the effect is no different. I have a good time watching the Time Monster, and I so wish everybody else did too. It has a pervading sense of fun, which I find very infectious. All of the cast seem to be having a great time, which means they attack the material with the requisite enthusiasm. And this then translates, as far as I can see, into 6 episodes, which pass by very amiably. That said, as fun as I find the whole thing, I still find myself waiting for it to all go tits up. It has to get its stripes as bad Doctor Who from somewhere, right? So enjoy this while you can, Chris, because it's all about to fall apart. And when I think that, I find myself considering how much I've enjoyed it up until that point. If it goes south now, I think, then at least I've had this much enjoyment from it up until now. And if it all goes to crud at this point, it will still result in this score. Unless it goes to crud in the biggest turnaround in the show's history up until this point. And that I reach the end, like the final end, and don't think it's turned to crud at all, means that I've just taken stock of 6 episodes, which, you know, I've quite enjoyed. So therefore, I can't claim to not like The Time Monster. So I know that received wisdom is that it's, you know, the bad one, and maybe even Pertwee's worst one. But sorry, I think it's good. We begin with the Doctor having a nightmare about the Master and exploding volcanoes. He then proceeds to make a machine to find the Master, which, as referenced above, looks exactly like, you know. All I'm saying is I don't think it's too much of a stretch when people, you know, ship the Doctor and the Master. There's so much material there that, you know, could suggest it. I mean, I'm being facetious. I myself would like to read all of the lava as the Doctor is still affected by the events of Inferno. But while that could be the case, and you can read that, of course you can, it does feel like the story itself is implying that it's really just a premonition and that the Master is about to do something bad, especially when you consider the visit to Atlantis later, and obviously Atlantis was lost and sunk. I can live with that. I just would prefer to think that it was the events of Inferno still affecting him. And once again, Delgado is great value. He as the Master, as the Professor, is a nice performance within a performance, and I really get the sense that the Master is enjoying himself. Sure, he's in the midst of a diabolical plan, but he's having fun along the way. He even says as much later on after he's finished bombarding UNIT with different elements from history. That alone is quite an imaginative idea for an action sequence, and yeah, obviously it's a little bit hampered by 1970s television production practices, which I think might end up contributing to how this story is perceived as a whole, but it's a fun wheeze regardless.
You know, I thoroughly enjoyed that.
It's as if he's just finished off a truly world-class meal. It is pure Master, and once again demonstrates what a great addition he is to the show. Having brought them up, it's actually nice to see the UNIT team again. Alright, okay. Less so Yates. I kind of wish he'd sat this one out, to be honest, but then I do kind of wish he sits out most of his stories. I just don't find him an appealing presence at all. And the fact that his fate is what the cliffhanger rests on to part 3 means that the cliffhanger kind of falls a little bit flat for me. Yeah, look, I know, I'm sorry. I just really don't like Yates. Now, I understand that this becomes charged conversation when rose-tinted glasses are applied to the past of Doctor Who sort of like blanketly. But I'm sure I met Richard Franklin once. Very, 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 very nice man. But I just don't like Yates. And I know that some people have tried to preempt the turn of events and Invasion of the Dinosaurs by commenting on that it's, you know, he gets the most satisfying arc of all the UNIT family. We'll talk about that, or I will talk about that when we get to that point on the marathon, but I don't think it really affects my perception or enjoyment of Yates as a character. I find him the weakest of the UNIT family, and I actually find him quite an obstacle in enjoying it when UNIT are around if he's part of it, which is obviously such a shame. Rest in peace, Richard Franklin. This is about Yates and not Franklin. That was a Yates fan. Much better, particularly in this story, is Benton. He's registered before, but only as a necessary accessory to UNIT and the Brigadier, but I found myself liking his increasingly put upon nature. In turn, it makes me like him. Having the fundamental aversion to Yates that I do also works in Benton's favour, but it's still nice to see him have so much more to do in this story. He manages to prove himself much more than in any of his previous showings. He's not fooled for a second by the Master's impression of Lethbridge Stewart, which actually marks him out as quite resourceful. I didn't dislike him before, not by any means, but nevertheless I would have in the past maybe sometimes struggled to articulate an opinion on Benton. But here, I can unequivocally declare one. I like him. And he does get given the story's comedy ending, which is nice for him, but I do have to say, it is one of the story's missteps. Not that they gave it to Benton, just that they decided to end the story like that at all. I have mentioned previously how much fun I find this story, but the crucial thing for me is the desired target. So, in this story, and in Pertwee's Era in general, When the humour is sort of like delivered casually in an almost throwaway kind of way, it really, really works. But when they do it down the barrel, in the way that they do with Naked Benton, it can come across as cloying. Ask us to laugh and we will. Tell us to laugh and we won't. But other than those final Scooby-Doo-esque seconds, I don't think this story is a bad one at all. Now, given the Time Monster's reputation, that in itself might be a controversial opinion, but I'm going to go one further and actually tell you I think it's a good story. Now there's a fly in the room. That'll teach you to slag Yates off. I don't even switch off when we get to Atlantis. Now, when it's introduced into the fold early doors, things are already moving apace. When we go back there later on, it hasn't come out of nowhere and it feels very natural in storytelling terms. Not to mention that we've got a script which treats the supporting cast very well in giving us characters like Stuart and giving him lovely lines like,
Lovey, I'm not men. I'm Stuart Hyde, registered card-carrying paid-up coward.
And that doesn't change when we meet the Atlanteans. King Dalios is great and his disbelief that the Master is a god is fantastic, and it gives us more of what I think actually this story contains some of the best lines ever in Doctor Who so far. A personal favourite is this one.
And what of great Poseidon? What did he have for breakfast? Fish, I suppose.
Flourishes like that only highlight the Time Monster as a pretty solid script.
This is Joe Grant, Your Majesty.
You are welcome, Jojo Grant.
And then a little bit later on,
Take the lady, Jojo Grant.
that's just silly. But it's a silly it feels like we haven't had for a really long time, and so I welcome it with open arms. With so much care taken over things like that, it can only be not to somebody's liking rather than being just inherently duff. For example, the really dismissive
Londoners
as the TARDIS dematerialises gets me every time. Yeah, that's an unrealistic reaction to a disappearing police box for sure, but it's a laugh, and it's been framed as a laugh by the story. So given that seems to be the tone the story's going for, then it actually feels like a success. If a story hadn't put as much work into creating this sort of like daft knockabout vibe that the Time Monster does, then that reaction to a TARDIS disappearing, let's say if it had happened in the midst of the Auton invasion in Spearhead from Space, then I wouldn't have cared for it. But here, it feels germane because the Time Monster has put care into being silly. And because it's put care into being silly, that silly is deliberate rather than, for me anyway, embarrassing. Returning to Atlantis, Jo in Atlantean garb is just adorable. Asking if there are mice on Atlantis so that she can finish an idiom about how quiet she's going to be is even more so. I was of the opinion that while Manning has been great throughout, Jo began with the potential to be great but wasn't reaching it. Recently, I believe she's achieved her potential. Here, I believe she has surpassed it. I love Jo with all of my heart. She and the Doctor are firmly secured as a formidable duo, perhaps the most formidable crew the show has seen.
Utter annihilation. Now, do you still want to come?
'Tis my job. Remember?
Glad to have you aboard, Miss Grant.
Glad to be aboard, Doctor.
The two of them together are bordering on magical. The scene where they are captive and he tells the story of the hermit, I'm hard pressed to think of a moment where Pertwee has been better. He knocks that bit out of the park, as he does most of what he has to do in this story. His explanation of chronovores, enhanced by a score that's rather chilling, is very effective and reminds us, amongst all the levity, that one of his greatest strengths is the sombre severity needed to take on the evil he does on a regular basis. The Doctor continues to be the Doctor I want him to be, and that means that Pertwee has managed to keep me on side for an entire season. When he's dealing with the aged Stuart, his bedside manner is open, caring and heartbreakingly honest. None of the tactless bluster that this Doctor has been capable of in the past, just the benevolent alien we all root for. That side of the Doctor is out in full force at the story's close, where he appeals for the Master's life. It makes perfect sense that he would do this, even if it might not be too good a look for Delgado when the Master emerges from his TARDIS whimpering and begging. Even with that rather undignified defeat, Delgado still emerges from this story as its greatest weapon. When the Master realises that he can keep Kronos at bay, it's one of Delgado's best performances. Like schoolboy glee laced with cold, murderous bastardery. Superb. When he and the Doctor bicker like kids through their scanners, it demonstrates that childish pettiness that runs through the Master beautifully, and offers Delgado an opportunity to further shade in his portrayal. Yes, it's ever so slightly strange to see him flirting with Galea, but hey, Troughton had a few infatuations, so it's really rather nice to see the Master have one too. It's also helpful in humanising him a little bit. More shade in that performance I was talking about. So, not how many fans would expect to finish Season 9, but I am delighted to have warmed to the Time Monster as much as I have. Okay, Kronos doesn't look too impressive, but as long-time Doctor Who fans know, a bad effect does not make for a bad story, and I think that is true here. I know it's got as many detractors, but I can't count myself among their number. I don't care who knows it. My name is Chris, and I like the Time Monster. 329 episodes behind me, and I'm about to make a start on Doctor Who's 10th season, which it marks with what is now a staple, or was until the 60th, of anniversary celebrations. Buoyed up by how much I've enjoyed the Time Monster, I'm kind of excited to see some old friends again. The Doctor's story of the Hermit. Beautiful. I'm not keen on the redesigned TARDIS interiors, but I think I'm going to give it to the Doctor going all MacGyver and countering Tom Tit with a wine bottle. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this second trip to Atlantis, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a big old like and share it around. I'd be super grateful. And what do you think of the Time Monster? One of Doctor Who's worst ever offerings, or a misunderstood gem? Have I been too kind to the story and too hard on Yates? Or not kind enough to the story? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for a recap of Season 9. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you soon.